Marcus Hill thought it was just another ordinary delivery. Another gate, another wait. But in an affluent neighborhood, a black man standing quietly was enough to be called a threat. 2 guards saw his skin color before they saw the package, and patience turned into handcuffs. In court, Marcus wasn't listened to, only judgment. Forced to confess to a crime he didn't commit, he refused to trade the truth for freedom. They believed he was defenseless. They were wrong. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe Marcus was right and we need to change prejudice today, then this story is for you. Late autumn settled gently over the outskirts of Chicago, the kind of afternoon where the air felt clean but sharp, sunlight pale and slanted, leaves scraping quietly along the asphalt as if the city itself were whispering. A thin wind moved through the suburbs, rattling bare branches and carrying the faint hum of traffic from miles away. It was not a dramatic day. It was the kind of day where nothing was supposed to go wrong. For Marcus Hill, that was exactly the point. Marcus was 30 years old, tall without trying to be, lean from long hours on his feet. His skin was a deep, even brown, his face narrow with high cheekbones and a jawline that looked firmer than it felt after years of swallowing words instead of speaking them. He kept his hair closely cropped, not for style, but because it was practical. Easy, invisible, unremarkable. His eyes were dark and steady, the kind that observed before reacting. People often described him as calm. Those who knew him better knew that calm was something he had learned. He wore the standard delivery uniform, navy jacket with reflective strips, faded jeans, scuffed work boots. The jacket bore the quiet marks of repetition, creases at the elbows, a loose zipper he never quite fixed. Marcus liked routine. Routine didn't ask questions. Routine didn't accuse. His day had begun like every other. Scan the parcels, load the van, sip burnt coffee, follow the route, smile when spoken to, keep moving, until the system rerouted him. The navigation app chimed softly and redirected him west, away from the dense neighborhoods he knew, toward a stretch of manicured streets that grew wider and emptier with every turn. Lawns widened, houses pulled farther back from the road. Trees stood like decorations rather than shelter. The sign appeared without ceremony. Westridge Estates Private Community. Authorized access only behind it, rose tall wrought iron gates, black and polished, flanked by stone pillars and discreetly mounted cameras. The place didn't look lived in. It looked guarded. Marcus checked the order again. Recipient: Evelyn Sterling delivery note, gate delivery, call upon arrival. He parked where the instructions indicated, stepped out of the van, and adjusted the package under his arm. It wasn't heavy. Expensive, maybe, but not large. Something delicate. He dialed the number. The call connected after 2 rings. Yes? The voice on the other end was smooth, controlled, white, carrying the tone of someone used to being listened to. There was a faint distraction behind it, movement, maybe a television. Hi, ma'am. This is Marcus, delivery for Evelyn Sterling. I'm at the gate. Oh, yes, I'm here. I'm just finishing something. Could you wait 5 minutes? I'll come out. Her voice wasn't unkind. It was efficient. Marcus heard it often. Of course, he said. No problem. He ended the call and stepped back from the gate, positioning himself clearly in view of the cameras. He didn't lean. He didn't touch the bars. He stood with the package held neatly against his chest, eyes forward, posture relaxed but deliberate. 5 minutes passed. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees beyond the fence. Somewhere inside the estate, sprinklers clicked on, misting the grass in perfect arcs. 10 minutes. Marcus checked his phone. No messages, no missed calls. He sent a short text. Hi, this is Marcus from delivery. I'm still at the gate. No reply. 15 minutes. He shifted his weight, careful not to look impatient. The silence inside the estate felt theatrical, like a stage set between scenes. Too clean. Too still. Marcus stepped closer, just enough to glance through the bars and confirm the address plaque on the inner wall. It took less than a second. That second was enough. "Hey!" The voice came from behind him. Marcus turned slowly. Two men stood several feet away, both wearing dark security uniforms with Westridge Estates stitched across the chest. The first, Logan Pierce, was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered with a rigid posture that suggested military training he talked about often. His skin was pale, his hair cut aggressively short, his face angular and tight, as if he clenched his jaw even when he slept. Logan believed deeply in rules, not because they were fair, but because they gave him shape. Beside him was Travis Mullen, younger, late 20s, stockier, with a thick neck and restless eyes. His hair was longer, curling at the edges beneath his cap. Travis carried himself with nervous energy, the kind that searched constantly for something to prove. He smiled too easily when others were uncomfortable. "What are you doing here?" Logan asked. Marcus lifted his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in openness. "I'm delivering a package," he said evenly. "For a resident. I called ahead. She asked me to wait." Travis's eyes flicked to the package, then to Marcus's face, then back to the gate. "You don't look like you're waiting," Travis said. "I am," Marcus replied. He unlocked his phone and held it out. "Here's the call. Here's the order." Logan didn't take the phone. Instead, he took a step closer. "You were looking inside the gate," Logan said. "I was checking the address," Marcus said. His voice remained calm, but something inside his chest tightened. He had learned this moment, the moment where explanation stopped working. Travis reached forward abruptly and grabbed the package from Marcus's arms. "Hey," Marcus said, instinctively stepping forward. "Please don't." Logan shoved him back. Hard. Marcus stumbled, his shoulders striking the iron bars with a hollow clang. "Don't move," Logan barked. "This is a mistake," Marcus said, breath sharp now. "I didn't do anything." Travis laughed once, short and humorless. "They always say that." Logan's fist came fast, not wild. Controlled. It caught Marcus across the cheekbone, snapping his head sideways. The world narrowed to a burst of light and metal. Marcus fell. Before he could gather himself, hands were on him, rough, efficient. A knee pressed into his back. Cold steel cuffs bit into his wrists. "Stop resisting," Logan said, even though Marcus wasn't. The gate's intercom chimed softly behind them, unanswered. A camera pivoted. Marcus was pulled to his feet, blood warm at the corner of his mouth, wrists locked behind him. "This doesn't make sense," he said, voice strained now, not from pain but disbelief. "You can call her. Evelyn Sterling, she told me to wait." Logan didn't look at him. Travis already had his radio up. "Suspicious individual detained," Travis said. "Possible attempted trespass." As they walked Marcus toward the patrol vehicle, the wind carried the sound of the gate closing behind them. Slow, deliberate, final. Inside the estate, the sprinklers continued their perfect arcs. Outside, Marcus Hill was loaded into the back seat like a problem already solved. And in the reflection of the tinted glass, the cameras kept watching. Across from him stood Officer Brian Keller, the desk sergeant on duty. Keller was in his early 40s, tall in a rigid, almost mechanical way with a solid build that came from routine rather than strength. His skin was pale, his hair sandy blonde and neatly parted, his eyes a washed-out blue that rarely lingered on people. He wore his uniform like armor, creases sharp, badge polished. Keller was known among officers as dependable, by which they meant predictable. He trusted paperwork more than people. Reports more than explanations. Years earlier, a civilian complaint had briefly stalled his career, and since then he had learned that survival meant keeping everything clean, simple, and aligned with authority. Keller flipped through a thin folder without looking up. Marcus Hill, he read aloud, voice flat. Trespassing on private property, suspected theft, resisting private security. Marcus leaned forward slightly. That's not what happened. I was delivering a package. I called the resident. She told me to wait. Keller turned a page. Uh-huh. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Not fear, not anger, but the knowledge that his words had already been weighed and discarded. You can check my phone, he added. The call's there. Keller finally looked at him then, not with curiosity, but with impatience. Everyone says they have proof, he said. Everyone says there's a call. He slid the folder across the desk, tapping it once with his finger. Marcus saw the heading at the top of the page. Incident Report. It was already filled out. Wait, Marcus said. You already wrote it? Keller shrugged. Standard procedure. Guards reported an attempted breach. We document. But you haven't heard me? Marcus said, his voice sharper now, despite himself. Keller stood, signaling the end of the exchange. You'll have a chance later. Marcus's phone was placed into a clear evidence bag, sealed with a practiced flick of Keller's wrist. The package, the same one he had carried carefully all afternoon, was tagged and marked Potential Evidence. When Marcus asked about the guard's body cam footage, Keller didn't hesitate. Temporarily unavailable, he said. Technical issue. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had learned long ago that certain phrases were doors closing, not explanations. Temporarily unavailable was one of them. He was led down a narrow hallway to a holding room, the cuffs removed only long enough to transfer him to a chair bolted to the floor. The door closed with a dull, final click. Hours passed in fragments. A public defender stopped by briefly, eyes tired, voice rushed. Marcus repeated his story. The defender nodded but said little, already glancing at his watch. When the room emptied again, Marcus sat alone with the hum of the lights and the steady realization that the story of what happened to him was no longer his. Across the city, in a low-rise office tucked between a tire shop and a laundromat, Tasha Brooks stared at her computer screen with growing unease. Tasha was 28, medium height with a compact athletic build and warm brown skin. She wore her hair in tight braids pulled back into a low ponytail, practical and precise, much like her approach to everything. Her eyes were quick, observant, the kind that noticed patterns others missed. She had grown up watching her mother work double shifts, learning early that systems only worked if someone cared enough to question them. Tasha was Marcus's route coordinator and his closest ally on the job. She knew his habits, his punctuality, his almost stubborn professionalism. When his route status froze for longer than expected, she checked the dashboard. The GPS log showed Marcus at Westridge Estates for 18 minutes. No deviations, no breach. Then the alert came through. Delivery interrupted. Driver detained. Tasha's stomach tightened. She pulled up the internal timeline. Marcus had arrived exactly when scheduled. The app recorded a completed call attempt to the recipient. The geofence showed him remaining outside the restricted perimeter the entire time. That doesn't make sense, she muttered. She called the number listed for Westridge Estates security office. The line rang twice before a smooth, practiced voice answered. We don't release internal security information, the operator said after Tasha explained who she was. I'm not asking for internal data, Tasha replied carefully. I'm confirming whether a delivery driver was authorized to be at the gate. There's no record we can share, the voice said, already disengaging. The call ended. Tasha leaned back in her chair, jaw clenched. She had seen this before. Incidents smoothed over by silence. Problems erased by procedure. She opened Marcus's employee file, Not because she needed to, but because she wanted to remind herself of what the system already knew. Spotless record, no complaints, 5 years without incident. He doesn't mess up, she said quietly. She began compiling everything she could: timestamps, GPS logs, call records, saving them to a separate folder. Not to prove anything yet, just to preserve it. On the other side of the city, beyond the guarded gates and trimmed hedges of Westridge Estates, Evelyn Sterling paced the length of her living room with her phone held uselessly in her hand. Evelyn was in her late 30s, tall and slender, her posture elegant even in irritation. Her skin was fair, her hair a soft chestnut brown, cut short and styled in loose curls that framed her face. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to control. Over space, over time, over outcomes. The house around her was immaculate, staged rather than lived in. Marble counters, muted artwork, carefully chosen furniture that suggested warmth without ever risking disorder. She had inherited not just wealth, but a way of seeing the world as something that responded to expectations. Her phone showed no signal. "Unbelievable," she said, tapping the screen. She had been on a call earlier. Something about a contractor running late, a network reset, a brief outage. 5 minutes had stretched into 20. She assumed the delivery driver would simply leave. She didn't check the gate camera. She didn't think to. When the signal returned, a series of missed notifications appeared. One text caught her eye. "Hi, this is Marcus from delivery. I'm still at the gate." Evelyn frowned. "Oh." She typed a quick response. "Sorry, just saw this. Coming now." But hesitated when the message failed to send, then disappeared entirely. She tried calling back. No answer. Evelyn set the phone down, irritation giving way to a faint, unsettled feeling she couldn't quite name. Something about the delay felt heavier than inconvenience, but she pushed the thought aside. Problems, she believed, resolved themselves. Back at the station, Marcus was processed and photographed, his expression carefully neutral. When asked to sign the report, he read it line by line, noting how the language had already decided his guilt. "I'm not signing this," he said quietly. Keller's mouth tightened. "That won't help you." Marcus met his eyes. "It won't help me to lie." The words hung there, small but stubborn. By the time Marcus was led to a temporary holding cell, the narrative had settled into place. One written without him, against him, and already moving forward. Outside, Tasha worked to save fragments of truth before they vanished. And somewhere behind iron gates, Evelyn Sterling stood in a pristine room, unaware that her 5-minute delay had become the first domino in a chain she could no longer see. The report was finished. The truth had not yet begun. The courtroom felt colder than the holding cell, though the air itself was warm. It was the kind of cold that came from structure. High ceilings, polished wood, flags pressed flat against the walls as if even fabric was expected to behave. Marcus Hill was brought in through a side door, wrists cuffed again, escorted past benches already half filled with people who had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the routine of judgment. At the front sat Judge Margaret Langford. She was in her early 50s, thin to the point of severity, her posture upright but brittle, as if held together by discipline alone. Her silver-gray hair fell straight to her shoulders, cut bluntly, without softness. Her face was narrow, sharp at the cheekbones, her lips pressed into a permanent line that suggested patience had long ago run out. Langford was known for efficiency. She had built her reputation on moving cases quickly, believing speed was a form of order. Years earlier, a public scandal involving judicial delays had embarrassed the court, and since then she had taken pride in never letting a case linger long enough to become complicated. Marcus was guided to the defense table, where his court-appointed attorney sat waiting. Daniel Price was in his mid-30s, average height, slightly overweight, his suit wrinkled at the elbows. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, evidence of too many cases and too little rest. He nodded briefly at Marcus, but did not meet his gaze for long. Daniel wasn't cruel or corrupt, just overwhelmed. His desk carried more files than time, and Marcus's name was only one among dozens that day. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Langford looked down at the docket. "State versus Marcus Hill," she said, voice clipped. "Proceed." The prosecutor rose. Richard Hale was a man who looked like he belonged exactly where he stood. In his late 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident stance and a voice trained for command, Hale wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. His hair, dark with gray at the temples, was combed neatly back, and his eyes were sharp, calculating. Hale believed in narratives, simple ones. He had built a career on knowing which facts to emphasize and which to leave quietly unspoken. "Your Honor," Hale began, pacing slowly, "the defendant deliberately entered a private, gated community under false pretenses. When confronted by security, he behaved suspiciously, resisted authority, and posed a potential threat to residents." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Hale continued, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "This case is straightforward. The guards acted appropriately. The police followed protocol. The defendant's behavior speaks for itself. Daniel Price stood briefly, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, my client maintains that he was performing his duties as a delivery driver and—" Judge Langford raised a hand without looking at him. "We'll hear from the defendant when appropriate." Daniel sat back down, relieved or resigned. Marcus couldn't tell which. As Hale spoke, Marcus watched the jury box, though it was empty for this preliminary hearing. He wondered how many people would eventually hear the same words, framed the same way, and never question them. When Hale finished, Judge Langford turned her attention to Marcus. Her eyes moved over him quickly, not unkindly, but not with interest either. "Mr. Hill," she said, "you will answer questions when asked. Do you understand?" Marcus stood, the cuffs clinking softly. "Yes, Your Honor, but I need to say—" "Sit down," Langford snapped, striking the gavel once. "You will not speak out of turn." The sound echoed sharply through the room, final and unquestionable. Marcus sat, his chest tight. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like a door closing. No one asked about the phone call. No one asked why the body cam footage was missing. No one asked why a man with no record would suddenly decide to commit a crime in broad daylight. The court moved on, scheduling the next hearing, discussing bail as if Marcus were already halfway gone. When it ended abruptly. The bailiff announced adjournment. People stood. Conversations resumed. Marcus was led away without having spoken a full sentence. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low voices and footsteps. Marcus was taken back toward the holding area, the echo of the gavel still ringing in his ears. He understood then that silence wasn't accidental. It was procedural. It was efficient. And it was expensive. Across town, in the modest operations office where delivery routes were monitored, Tasha Brooks sat rigid in her chair, her phone pressed to her ear. The hearing had already concluded by the time she arrived at the courthouse, turned away by security with a polite but firm refusal. She paced now, frustration sharpening her movements. "This doesn't add up," she said aloud, though no one was listening. Tasha pulled up Marcus's data again. Timestamps, GPS coordinates, call logs. The evidence didn't scream innocence. It whispered it. And whispers were easy to ignore. She needed someone who listened for them. That was when she thought of Claire Bennett. Claire was a local investigative journalist, late 30s, tall and slender, with an intensity that lived behind her calm demeanor. Her brown hair was usually pulled back into a loose knot, strands escaping as she worked, and her gray-blue eyes missed very little. Claire dressed simply, dark jackets, flat shoes, favoring mobility over appearance. Years earlier, she had exposed a misuse of force case involving private security contractors, earning her both respect and quiet enemies. She trusted documents more than statements and patterns more than promises. Tasha found Claire's contact information through an old article and hesitated only a second before dialing. They met that evening in a small cafe not far from the courthouse. Rain tapped lightly against the windows now, the sky dimming into early evening. Claire arrived with a notebook tucked under her arm, her posture attentive but guarded. Tasha didn't waste time. She laid out everything: Marcus's work history, the GPS logs, the call attempt, the missing body cam footage. The report was written before he spoke, Tasha said, her voice steady but tight. They decided what he was before he opened his mouth. Claire's expression shifted, subtle but immediate. Her pen paused mid-note. "That's not a mistake," Claire said quietly. "That's a pattern." She asked careful questions, not about Marcus's character but about timelines. Who logged the incident? Who controlled the cameras? Who benefited from the narrative being simple? By the time Tasha finished, Claire closed her notebook slowly. "This case was shaped from the start," she said. "And when that happens, truth usually has to fight its way back in." Tasha exhaled, some of the weight lifting just slightly. "Can you help?" Claire met her eyes. "I can look. I can ask questions they don't like, but understand this, once we start, they won't make it easy." Tasha nodded. They already didn't. Back at the detention center, Marcus lay on a narrow bench, staring at the ceiling. The echo of the courtroom replayed in his mind. Not the accusations, but the silences between them. He thought of the moment he had tried to speak, the gavel cutting him off like a blade. He wondered how many times that sound had ended stories before they were told. And somewhere beyond the walls of concrete and procedure, a reporter had begun to listen. The holding facility had no windows, no visible clocks, no sounds that belonged to the outside world. Time did not pass there so much as it dissolved. The lights stayed the same dull white no matter how long. Marcus Hill sat on the narrow bench in his cell, his hands resting on his knees, his back straight out of habit rather than comfort. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old metal, a smell that never changed, making every hour feel identical to the last. Marcus learned quickly that this place was not designed to break bones. It was designed to bend decisions. He was brought into an interrogation room several times a day, sometimes by officers he recognized, sometimes by men whose faces blended together into a single expression of practiced indifference. The room was small, beige, and deliberately empty except for a metal table and 2 chairs. No camera was visible, though Marcus suspected one existed somewhere behind the walls. During the first session, Detective Alan Morris introduced himself. Morris was in his mid-50s, heavy-set with thinning dark hair and a permanent downward curve to his mouth that made him look disappointed even when he was calm. He spoke slowly, almost kindly, the way a tired parent might speak to a stubborn child. Years ago, Morris had worked a high-profile case that fell apart under scrutiny, and ever since then he preferred resolutions that left no loose ends. "This doesn't have to be hard," Morris said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. "You sign this, you take a plea, and you're out sooner than you think." Marcus glanced at the paper without touching it. "It says I tried to break into the gate." Morris sighed. "That's what the report says." "That's not what happened," Marcus replied. Morris leaned back in his chair. "Look, Marcus, I've been doing this a long time. People in your position don't win fights like this, but they do survive them." "I didn't do it," Marcus said again, his voice even. The next sessions were less gentle. The kindness drained away, replaced by impatience, then irritation. One officer raised his voice. Another accused Marcus of wasting everyone's time. They spoke about his future as if it were already decided: lost work, mounting fees, probation that would follow him for years. "Just sign," one of them said, tapping the table. "You'll be home before you know it. You want to sit in here for months over a delivery?" Marcus thought of the truth like a fragile object. If he set it down, Even for a moment, he might never pick it back up. "I'm not signing," he said. The pressure increased subtly. They delayed meals. They interrupted his sleep with late-night questioning. Once, an officer shoved a chair aside too hard, letting it crash into the wall, watching Marcus closely to see if he would flinch, if anger would flash across his face. Marcus did not give them that satisfaction. He had learned long before that reactions could be repurposed, that restraint was often mistaken for guilt, and anger quickly rewritten as aggression. He breathed slowly, answering only what was asked, refusing to argue, refusing to perform. Inside, though, the strain accumulated. There were moments, lying awake on the bench, staring at the blank ceiling, when doubt crept in. Not doubt about what he had done, but doubt about whether truth mattered at all once it was inconvenient. Meanwhile, beyond the walls of the facility, Claire Bennett sat hunched over a cluttered desk in her apartment, papers spread around her like pieces of a puzzle that refused to settle. The lamp beside her cast a warm circle of light that contrasted sharply with the cold efficiency of the documents she read. Claire had changed out of her jacket, but not her focus. Her posture was alert, shoulders slightly forward as if leaning into the work. She moved with quiet intensity, scanning reports line by line, cross-referencing dates and descriptions. Her experience had taught her that lies were rarely bold. They hid in small inconsistencies. One sentence in the private security report caught her attention. Suspect appeared to manipulate gate-locking mechanism. Claire frowned. She pulled up the attached exhibits. No still image. No clip. Just a notation. Camera feed unavailable during incident window. She checked the timestamp, then checked the call log Marcus had attempted to show the police. The gap matched exactly. "That's convenient," she murmured. Claire requested records from Westridge Estates management. Maintenance logs, camera downtimes, anything that could explain the missing footage. The response came back swiftly and politely worded. "We are unable to release internal security infrastructure details." Claire expected as much. She adjusted her approach. Instead of asking for data, she asked for people. Her search led her to the delivery record itself. The recipient name stood out clearly. Evelyn Sterling. Claire paused. The name carried weight, not celebrity, but proximity to influence. She ran a quick background check. No scandals, no criminal history. A life neatly arranged, untouched by the messiness Claire dealt with daily. She dialed the number listed, half expecting voicemail. It rang. On the third ring, someone answered. "Hello?" Evelyn Sterling's voice was smooth but cautious. Claire introduced herself, her tone professional, careful not to accuse. "I'm calling about a delivery made to your address earlier this week," Claire said. "A man named Marcus Hill." There was a pause, not a dropped call. A silence filled with processing. "Yes," Evelyn said slowly. "I remember." Claire explained what had happened. Briefly, precisely. She described the arrest, the charges, the timeline. On the other end of the line, Evelyn sank into the armchair by her living room window. She was still dressed impeccably, though the day had worn on her. Her home was quiet now. The earlier frustration over poor reception long gone, replaced by something heavier. I told him to wait," Evelyn said, the words barely above a whisper. "I was dealing with something inside. I lost signal. I didn't think—" Her voice faltered. Evelyn Sterling had always considered herself fair. She donated to charities, spoke politely to staff, believed she treated people well. But this realization cut through that carefully maintained self-image. Her delay, so minor in her mind, had become the opening for something violent. "Oh my God," she said. "They arrested him because of me." Claire listened without interrupting. She had learned that moments like this were fragile. People either closed themselves off or stepped forward. "Did you see him try to open the gate?" Claire asked gently. "No," Evelyn said immediately. He was just standing there, waiting. Claire closed her notebook slowly. Would you be willing to say that on record? Evelyn hesitated. Her gaze drifted to the large windows of her home, the gates visible in the distance. For the first time, they looked less like protection and more like separation. Yes, she said at last. I would. Back in the detention center, Marcus was led once more into the interrogation room. This time, the paper waiting for him was the same, but the tone had changed. Less patience now, more insistence. You're making this harder than it needs to be, an officer said. Marcus looked at the page, then pushed it back across the table. I'm not guilty, he said quietly, and I won't say that I am just to make you comfortable. The officer stared at him, then scoffed. Suit yourself. Marcus was escorted back to his cell. As the door closed, the sound echoed longer than before. He did not know that, at that very moment, the first crack had appeared in the story built against him. He did not know that someone outside had finally connected his silence with the truth instead of guilt. But for the first time since the gates closed behind him, the pressure was no longer moving in only one direction. Evelyn Sterling had always believed that discomfort was temporary. Problems, if left alone, softened with time. That belief had been reinforced by years of living inside quiet rooms where consequences rarely arrived uninvited. But that night, time did not soften anything. It pressed harder. She lay awake in her bedroom long after the lights were off, staring at the ceiling where shadows from passing cars slid like slow thoughts she couldn't push away. The house was silent except for the low hum of the climate system. Somewhere downstairs, a digital clock changed numbers without making a sound. Evelyn hadn't slept through the night in years, and the unfamiliar restlessness unsettled her. She sat up, wrapped a robe around her shoulders, and went downstairs. The living room looked exactly as it always did, clean, balanced, untouched. And yet it felt accusatory, as if the stillness itself were asking what she had done. Evelyn was 38, tall and slim, her movements precise even in exhaustion. Her short chestnut hair curled softly at the ends, framing a face accustomed to control. People described her as composed, gracious, reasonable. Those traits had grown from a childhood where composure was praised and mistakes were quietly managed, not confronted. Public responsibility was something others handled. Private guilt, she was learning, was heavier. She opened her laptop at the kitchen island and began to search. First, the obvious. Her call history. There it was. A missed outgoing call from an unfamiliar number, time-stamped exactly when the delivery was scheduled. She clicked deeper, hands steady despite the tightness in her chest. The number matched the delivery record. Marcus Hill. She replayed the voicemail she hadn't noticed earlier. His voice was calm, professional, faintly winded from standing outside. Hi, this is Marcus from delivery. I'm at the gate, nothing more. Nothing threatening, nothing urgent. Evelyn swallowed. She checked her messages. There was the text he'd sent while waiting. She remembered now, remembered glancing at her phone while dealing with a water leak in the laundry room, irritation rising as the signal dropped again. She had told herself she would respond later. Later had become never. Next, she pulled up the doorbell camera. The footage showed nothing unusual. Sunlight across the driveway, the quiet street beyond the inner wall, the occasional shadow of a bird. Then, at the edge of the frame, a figure standing outside the gate. Marcus. He was still, holding a package, phone in hand. He never crossed the threshold. Evelyn leaned closer to the screen. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. She checked the garage camera next. That clip showed her, bent over a burst hose, frustration etched across her face as water pooled at her feet. The timestamp overlapped perfectly with the moment Marcus had been waiting. With the moment, everything went wrong. "This is my fault," she whispered, But fault, she was learning, did not equal proof. When Claire Bennett arrived the next morning, Evelyn looked smaller somehow, still elegant but stripped of her certainty. Claire noted it immediately. Years of interviewing people at their most defensive had taught her to read the space between words, the pauses that betrayed fear. Claire sat across from Evelyn at the same kitchen island, notebook open but pen still. She let Evelyn speak first. "I didn't think it mattered," Evelyn said, fingers wrapped tightly around a mug she hadn't touched. 5 minutes, 10. I assumed he'd leave. And instead, Claire said gently, he was arrested. Evelyn nodded, her composure cracking just enough to let shame through. "I've gone through everything I have. Calls, cameras. It shows he was there, waiting. It shows I caused the delay." Claire reviewed the files carefully, her expression focused but restrained. "This helps," she said. "It establishes context. It explains why he was still there." "But it doesn't prove he didn't touch the gate," Evelyn said. Claire closed the laptop. "Exactly." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that missing piece pressing down on them both. "We need footage from the gate," Claire said finally, "and if it's gone, we need to know how it disappeared." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "They'll never give it to you." "They don't have to," Claire replied. "We just need to prove it existed." Across town, Tasha Brooks had not slept much either. She sat in the delivery company's technical support office, shoulders hunched forward, eyes fixed on a monitor that displayed lines of code and system logs. Tasha had changed into a hoodie and jeans, abandoning her usual neat uniform. When she focused like this, appearance became irrelevant. Tasha was methodical by nature. She trusted systems because she understood how they failed. She pulled up the app's security features, tools most drivers barely noticed. One of them was a short auto-capture function triggered when a driver arrived at restricted delivery points. The footage was low resolution, easy to miss, and often overwritten after a week unless flagged. Marcus's file had not been flagged. Tasha's fingers hovered over the keyboard as she ran a recovery query, her breath shallow. If the clip had already been overwritten, it would be gone. No appeal. No workaround. "Come on," she murmured. The system responded slowly, grinding through archived data. Then it appeared. A 12-second clip. Tasha clicked play. The video showed the outer gate of Westridge Estates from a low angle. Marcus stood several feet away, clearly outside the perimeter. He held the package against his chest, phone to his ear. He waited. He shifted his weight once. He did not touch the gate. Tasha felt something close to relief, but sharper. She copied the file immediately, then duplicated it again, sending it to secure storage. She called Claire without hesitation. "I have it," she said when Claire answered. "Have what?" "Proof," Tasha replied. "He never touched the gate, not once." Claire closed her eyes briefly, letting the moment settle. "Send it, now." When Evelyn arrived at Claire's apartment that evening, the air felt charged. Claire's small living room was cluttered with documents and screens, the walls lined with framed articles from years of investigations. It was not a place built for comfort, but for truth. Claire cued the video on her laptop. Evelyn leaned forward as it played. There he was, Marcus, waiting. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand. "That's him," she said. "That's exactly how he looked." Claire nodded. "And that's exactly what didn't make it into the report." They sat together, 3 women connected by something none of them had anticipated days earlier. Marcus, meanwhile, remained unaware of any of it. In the detention center, Marcus sat alone on his bench, the walls closing in with familiarity. He had stopped counting days. He marked time instead by routines, meals, lights, footsteps in the hall. He knew something was happening outside. He felt it in the change of tone from the officers, in the way questions had slowed, become more careful, but no one told him why. That night, Claire assembled the evidence carefully, like someone laying out a fragile mechanism. The call logs, the doorbell footage, the garage camera, and now the 12-second clip. "This changes everything," Claire said, though her voice held caution. "If we present it right." Evelyn straightened. "I'll testify," she said. "I'll say it was my delay. I'll say he was waiting because I told him to." Claire studied her for a long moment. She had learned to distrust sudden courage. But she saw something different in Evelyn's eyes now. Not performance, but resolve, tempered by fear. "All right," Claire said. "Then we move fast." Somewhere behind concrete walls, Marcus Hill lay awake, staring into the dim light, still refusing to trade truth for comfort. He did not know that a race had begun on his behalf, only that for the first time since his arrest, the silence around him felt thinner. The courtroom looked the same as it always had. Polished wood, neutral colors, flags standing stiff and silent in their corners. The air was cool, efficient, impatient. It was the kind of place where decisions like to arrive quickly and leave no room behind them. Judge Margaret Langford took her seat with the same expression she wore in every proceeding. Composed, distant, already finished with the outcome before it began. Marcus Hill was led in moments later, wrists cuffed once again. The metal clicked softly with each step, a sound that had begun to feel like punctuation in his life. He scanned the room out of habit, not expectation. The prosecutor's table was full. His appointed lawyer avoided his eyes. The benches behind him were scattered with strangers who had come to witness routine, not justice. There was no one there for him. Marcus lowered his gaze and waited. Judge Langford glanced at the docket. "We'll proceed," she said, voice clipped. Her posture suggested efficiency, not curiosity. To her, this was a matter to be closed. The prosecutor rose, already preparing to restate arguments Marcus had heard too many times. Before he could speak, the back doors of the courtroom opened. The sound cut cleanly through the room. Heads turned. Evelyn Sterling stepped inside. She moved slowly but deliberately, her heels quiet against the floor. She wore a simple, elegant dress in muted tones, tailored but understated. Her hair, short, softly curled, framed her face without ornament. She looked composed, but the confidence she carried now was different from before. It was not entitlement. It was resolve earned through discomfort. Behind her walked Claire Bennett, her presence sharp and unmistakable. Claire wore a dark blazer and flat shoes, her brown hair pulled back loosely, a folder tucked firmly under her arm. Her gray-blue eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the judge, the prosecutor, the defense table. She walked like someone who expected resistance and welcomed it. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Langford frowned. "What is this?" she asked. Claire stepped forward. "Your Honor, we request leave to introduce newly discovered evidence relevant to the defendant's arrest." The prosecutor objected immediately, his voice firm but strained. "This is highly irregular." Evelyn didn't wait to be invited. She walked directly toward Marcus. Marcus looked up, startled. Evelyn placed a hand on his shoulder. The touch was brief, respectful, steady. It carried no performance, no ownership, only acknowledgement. Marcus felt it more than he expected, not because it changed what had happened, but because it named it. She turned to face the court. "My name is Evelyn Sterling," she said clearly. "I am the resident who requested the delivery that day, and I am here to tell the truth." The courtroom went still. Judge Langford's eyes narrowed. "Proceed," she said after a moment, irritation masked as patience. Claire handed Evelyn a small remote. Evelyn faced the large screen mounted near the bench. "I asked Mr. Hill to wait," Evelyn continued. "I lost phone service inside my home and failed to return promptly. He was still at the gate because I told him to be." The prosecutor shook his head. "That doesn't change the allegation of attempted entry." Claire stepped in. "It does, Your Honor, because the allegation is false." She nodded to Evelyn. The screen flickered to life. First came the 12-second clip. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Marcus stood several feet from the gate, package held against his chest, phone in hand. He did not approach the lock. He did not touch the bars. He waited. Every eye in the room lifted. The silence this time was different. It wasn't imposed. It wasn't procedural. It was earned. Next, Claire displayed the call logs, timestamps lining up precisely with the video, then GPS data from the delivery application, a clean line marking Marcus's location outside the restricted perimeter. The prosecutor's confidence faltered. Papers shifted. A whisper passed between him and his assistant. Judge Langford leaned forward for the first time, studying the screen instead of the defendant. "This footage," she said slowly, "was not included in the original report." "No, Your Honor," Claire replied. Nor was the fact that the gate camera feed was conveniently unavailable during the exact window. The report claims an attempted breach occurred. Judge Langford's jaw tightened. The courtroom felt as though it were holding its breath. After a brief recess, one that stretched longer than Marcus expected, the judge returned. Her expression had changed, not softened, but sharpened. "Based on the evidence presented," Judge Langford said, "the court finds no probable cause to proceed. All charges against Marcus Hill are dismissed. He is free to go." For a moment, Marcus didn't move. Then the bailiff unlocked the cuffs. The sound echoed louder than any gavel. Marcus stood, his hands rubbing instinctively at his wrists. He felt lightheaded, as if gravity itself had loosened its grip. Around him, the courtroom shifted into motion. Voices rising, chairs scraping, but none of it reached him fully. The prosecutor avoided his gaze. Judge Langford did not apologize. She did not need to. The record would speak for itself now. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. It was warmer than Marcus remembered. Sharper. Real. Cameras waited on the steps. Evelyn stood before them, shoulders squared. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly. "My delay contributed to a misunderstanding that led to an innocent man being arrested," she said. "But misunderstanding alone doesn't explain what happened. Bias does." She named it carefully, deliberately. "I failed to recognize how quickly assumptions can turn dangerous. I won't pretend otherwise." She announced the creation of a legal fund supporting wrongfully accused workers and confirmed her cooperation with an initiative led by Claire Bennett, pushing for mandatory transparency of private security camera systems. Claire stood beside her, watchful, already thinking about what came next. Not far away, Tasha Brooks watched from the edge of the crowd. She looked tired, proud, relieved. Her braids were pulled back as usual, her posture steady. When Marcus spotted her, she smiled. A small, fierce smile that said, "I didn't stop." Later that afternoon, Marcus sat alone on the courthouse steps for a moment, letting the noise fade. Freedom did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, with space to breathe. He wasn't suddenly healed. He still carried the knowledge that his skin had written a story about him before he ever spoke. That part hurt, and it lingered. But when he stood to leave, Evelyn and Tasha were there, not to save him, not to speak for him, but to stand with him. "We were wrong," Evelyn said simply, "and we won't be silent again." Marcus nodded. He took a deep breath. For the first time in days, the air tasted like possibility. Before he stepped away, he turned back toward the cameras, his voice calm, unraised, unmistakable. "If you're still carrying prejudice," he said, "change it today." And then he walked forward, unshackled, unseen no longer, into a life that would remember this moment not as an ending, but as proof. Marcus Hill did not walk away from the courthouse believing the world had suddenly become fair. Freedom did not erase the bruises on his wrists or the quiet fear that now followed him into ordinary places. What it gave him was something smaller, but harder to destroy: the knowledge that truth can survive even when it is buried, and that silence does not always win. This story was never just about a gate, a courtroom, or a single mistake. It was about how quickly a person can be reduced to a suspicion, how easily skin color can replace evidence, and how dangerous it becomes when power stops listening. Marcus did not choose his color. He did not choose the assumptions made about him. But he chose something else. He chose not to lie, not to disappear, not to surrender his truth for comfort. Justice did not arrive loudly. It did not come with applause or revenge. It came quietly, through people who chose to look again, to question what felt normal, and to admit when they were wrong. And that is where real change begins. If this story moved you, let it do more than pass through you. Let it change how you see the next stranger. Let it slow your judgment. Let it remind you that dignity is not earned by color, wealth, or power. It is inherent. Because fairness should never depend on skin. Because justice should never ask what you look like before it listens. And because a better world begins the moment we choose to see people, not prejudice. If you still carry bias, change it today. Someone's freedom may depend on it.